And we are live. Hello, level uppers. It's a weekly brain boosting session, insight session. And today I thought we'd have a really insightful conversation. It can go many, many different directions, and we're going to flow it into what I want to do. First of all, let's introduce you, Danny Nemu, and um, in many different ways you can say that. Um, Please introduce yourself because it's going to be so much better if you, unless you want me to ask you questions.
No, I can do it. It's all right. Hi, Rory. Thanks for having me. I deliberately chose a pen name that is difficult to pronounce. And since we've got a bit of a neurodiverse crowd here, one of the things that neurodiversity opened up is millions of possibilities. What am I going to say? What's the next word? How do you say this word? My name is Danny Nemu. Um, that will do for the introduction of my name. I am a reverend who was ordained on the internet, and I've written a couple of books, including one on what's going on inside our brains, looking a little bit at neurodiversity and autism and other wonders.
Fantastic.
And the reason we're in touch, I guess, I mean, I've known Rory for extremely long time. I'm 47, so what's that? About, I think I knew when I was about 20, 18 or something. So that's too many years for me to count. But I
It was actually
published
it
an
was
article.
actually way before then. It was way before then. It was 1995, I think, when I first met you.
So me and Rory met last millennium. Um, uh, and just the other week, I published an article on ADHD and looking at whether it was a good idea for us to, whether that label was useful, whether we could come up with different labels, and also looking into Ritalin, looking into the science around Ritalin, the terrible science around Ritalin, looking at a few herbal interventions which have better science behind them, and also looking at the history of psychiatry and what it means to define somebody and whether we should allow ourselves to be defined by somebody else. And if that definition leads to medicalization and medication, where is our autonomy in this? And finally, what is the gift that the neurodiverse or the NeuroWonky can bring to our troubled world?
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's really, really fascinating stuff. And um, yeah, I summed it up as NeuroWonky because that's what you've liked to term it as, and as well. And actually, what I really, really got from what you were saying about it, the first thing that came up for me was definitions. And yeah, and NeuroWonky is a great reference point for something, and it can also be important to like I'm very passionate about that too, about what is a definition, what is actually a definition, is a reference point in time, and that actually helps us to understand that reference point, but it doesn't necessarily have to be fixed. We can spend humans can spend a whole lot of time arguing over a definition of a particular word, even, and what it actually means, right?
Yeah, that's and particularly for like people on the neurodiverse spectrum, this is really important. We, I'm speaking for a lot of people, but generally neurodiverse people don't categorize so readily as other people, and that can get really extreme when you get up into kind of severe forms of autism, where the world just can get more and more chaotic, it seems. And in fact, severe autists won't be able to manage language in many cases. But one of the things which unites people on those various spectrums is that the world is just a little bit more confusing, a little bit more chaotic. And it's quite nice to have something pinned down. You're like, oh, okay, that is that thing. But it doesn't come quite so readily. There's an autist by the name of, is it Nauki or Nauta? Yeah. Actually got a wonderful quote about how he, I'm gonna find he's got a beautiful quote about how a tree comes into his vision. Let me just give me 1 sec and I'll find it.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely. Yeah. I like the way you
Go ahead.
I like the way you called it autist. I like that in some ways, uh,
Oh
rather than
yeah.
like it being an ick. Like I'm a dis dyslec or something.
Oh yeah, like,
Or dyslexist. No, well, I don't even like the word dis. To be honest with you, I mean, yeah. Again, whilst you're searching for that, the idea around the label to go, what is a negative trait and what is not a negative trait, I feel is so um uh it's so subjective and yet yeah it's it makes me wonder whether mental health conditions would exist if we didn't have to feel like we all try to fit into what other people think of us in some way, shape, or form.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's a history behind that. You know, if we look at DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for diagnosing a mental disorder or other psychiatric disorder, which is what ADHD is. It's considered a psychiatric disorder. So fuck off, whoever decided that. But yeah, it kind of came about in the context of the Korean War. And you had all these there was a couple of things. It was the extension of American healthcare insurance to cover the whole population, and also this massive caseload of people who were damaged by the Korean War. And these people didn't have their legs blown off or something. So in order for them to have to get access to their medical insurance, they needed to have a definable condition, right? But to look at them, they were fine. And in the First World War, they used to call it shell shock. But then they started developing a whole series of complaints or categories of pathology which are not obvious, like an amputated arm, which could still access American insurance. So we're right in the belly of capitalism, right at the beginning of this. And then there's that question, right? So if we are going to step into that definition, then let's at least understand where it comes from, where it's useful to us, for example,
Mm. Yeah, I like the word useful as well. Like whether it's an unuseful habit that is forming, or is it a useful habit that is forming, and what does that mean to the person? And it's the same as unhelpful or helpful habits that can form. And I'm fascinated about the thing about habit formation and neuroplastic change and what what occurs from what is repeated. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's it. And also there's another thing about particularly autists or people on the ADHD. Well, I'm talking fairly I'm not making a really clear distinction here between autism and ADHD. But if you look at the markers of kind of the markers in the brain, they overlap in quite a big way, ADHD and autism. And actually, one of the points I made in this recent article is that they also overlap in terms of jail cells. There's much more people. There's like 3% of the population is estimated to have ADHD, but 25% of the prison population has ADHD. And autism not so much, but dyslexics as well, which also overlaps with that. Uh, with that group, they're also overrepresented in prison. Still looking for this thing. Oh yeah, here we go. Naoki Higashida is his name, who describes he's autistic. He wrote a fantastic book called "Why Do I Jump?" And he said this. He says, "When you see an object, it seems that you see it as an entire thing first, and only afterwards do its details follow on. But for people with autism, the details jump straight out at us first of all, and then only gradually, detailed by detail, does the whole image sort of float into focus." And that happens along the spectrum. But you get those with autists, they get kind of talk about point fixation. I used to teach autists when I was a teacher, and I remember this one girl. who used to just get fascinated by her desk and by the kind of geography of her desk. I see a desk and it's a desk, it's categorized, it's fixed, it's named. I don't really think about it anymore, but she saw this wondrous topography wherever she looked. So those categories, so there's kind of two sides of this because, it is very confusing to be surrounded by chaos all the time, you know. And he's got a really, this is again Higashida, the same guy. He talks about why he likes numbers so much. He says numbers are fixed, unchanging things. That simplicity, that clearness is so comforting to us. And when it comes to our favorite things, we can memorize these as easily if they were jumping straight into our heads. There's something about the fixity which is really pleasant for people who are autistic, people who have ADHD, right? So there's kind of a reason why I think that a lot of people with ADHD are kind of, or sorry, I said that carelessly. A lot of people with the cognitive style, also known as ADHD, which I like to call NeuroWonky, are kind of grabbing onto that label and really quite protective over that label. Yeah, because it's nice when something's fixed. I'm not a weirdo anymore. As I said in this essay as well, it's nicer to be a zebra than a weird horse. Yeah. But look at who's making that definition, right? Look what they're calling you. They're calling you disordered, what is it? Hyperactive and with attention deficit. Nothing wrong with my attention if I'm concentrating on something I'm interested in. So it's like it's incorrect and insulting, and it leads into a system where we're already marginalized and abnormal, right? It's tough enough having to deal with people who aren't on the wonderful spectrum that I am. Anyway, and then to be kind of, ratifying the insulting names that are put upon me, I'm not down with it.
Fair play. Yeah. Yeah, I love everything you said there. And then to pick one element of that, the interesting thing about the crossover of autism and ADHD, as you mentioned, and where there could be similar patterns going, and I feel the more I've spoken to people, and coming from finding out I was dyslexic first before any of the other things. I haven't actually had any other diagnoses as such. I see, but I've seen the patterns. I sort of will automatically zoom out and see bigger things before but then I do love detail as well. So it's like, but yeah, so but the idea, what I'm fascinated in is potentially the idea around how different personalities can lead into different traits that can then be called out as negative or not. But I'm talking about like whether someone is more relatable to emotions or not, because there is like autistic people that who are overly sensitive and can't stop feeling things or feeling emotions or assuming things potentially, and then there's a side of things where it's completely maybe unrelatable to see what other people feel or so yeah, I find that really interesting, and where that potentially the the sort of assertive, I'm going to do what I want kind of character compared to the supporter. What do you want? What do you need? And it can then go into how does that go into like being hypersensitive about what anyone else is thinking, or just being unable to at all relate to anyone's emotional responses.
Yeah, super interesting. A friend of mine's, what do I call her? Baby mama, I guess. It's the correct term, was complaining about him being an HSP. She said, "You're an HSP," which is a highly sensitive person, right? I mean, even that's becoming, what is it, like pathologized at this point? You have these things again, back to that book, something like GA, generalized anxiety. And like if I am anxious, yeah, sometimes I feel anxious. That's an adjective. If I have GA, I've got anxiety. That's a different thing. It's a noun, right? And I find the Hebrew language really informative here. The word for noun in Hebrew is shem, and it means it's related to the word shema. Actually, it's related to the word to perceive, or to hear or perceive. Right, it's a thing which can be perceived. Now, anxiety as an adjective. Sorry, anxious. I'm anxious. You can't perceive anxious. You can perceive an anxious person. Right. It's about, and it means to fix. Um, uh, so when something is fixed and becomes a noun, it becomes a lot less fluid, obviously. So that sensitivity, it's quite easy for us to think, for example, my boss is an asshole, right? And I don't have to think about my boss anymore. Just, okay, he's in the category of assholes. I know how I think about assholes. I don't have to think about that anymore. I don't have to think about my relationship with my boss, whatever it might be, you know? If those edges are a little bit more porous, you know, a little bit more fluid, and they are in the kind of neuro-wonky brains, and also after a dose of mushrooms or something, then those relationships can be reassessed at all points. You know, it's much easier to reassess those things and think through that.
Mm.
I'm quite interested in what you're saying there about, you know, because there's that kind of, let's call it the autistic spectrum, but then you've also got different personality types that are going to interact with that spectrum in different ways. So there's kind of two different kind of axes there. So what are you thinking about, let's say, more helpful people, or more directed people, or what are you thinking?
Well, again, it's around that perception of what someone's, you know, someone's assertive. They could be just going, oh, this is what I think is needed, and just doing it. That's not necessarily right or wrong, and so it's more wondering whether that's a relationship or not with the perception of emotion or not as well, to do with, yeah, to do with those that are more supportive types are sensitive to the area, yeah, the outside world, rather than just being about what I want to do and doing it. You know, like fire signs in horoscopes and Chinese medicine, not Chinese, Chinese horoscopes, and the idea around fire being about doing and asserting, and water being about feeling, things like that. So the characters of horoscopes, for instance, and how they maybe potentially relate to being either sensitive or desensitive to others, and energies and other external forces.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can definitely use those ideas of a fiery person, a watery person, a reflective person, or a more earthy person, you know, even kind of detaching it from the whole idea of horoscopes, if that's not what people are down with. But yeah, it can be a very good way of thinking around a person.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah, what I'm loving it so far with this conversation. And I'm thinking, like, what do you see going forwards, rather than like getting stuck on all the bullshit from the past and labels, and whether it's traits or, you know, pathologizing or anything like that? What would you like to see going forwards?
Mm. I think we're knee deep. I think we're neck deep in the problems which have been associated with, they've been brought about by, I want to be really careful here. Identity politics has caused quite a stir, right? It's caused quite uh, a wound in our psyches. It's a new thing, people defining themselves as this or that, right? I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's a new thing. So in the Middle Ages, if a man went home with a man at the end of an evening, rather than a woman, he wouldn't have redefined himself as homosexual or something like that, right? These are kind of new terms. Again, actually, they're kind of, in many ways, they come from the history of psychiatry. So we're in a kind of phase of I don't know, like society where we all seem to be defining ourselves with like Twitter handles, you know. We put our pronouns up there, we put our psychiatric conditions up there, we all of these kind of things. And you know, it's equally careless to say I don't see color. So I'm not advocating that, but I think it's just important that we look at people, you know, and be loving basically enough to to other people and also to ourselves. And I hear people saying, "Oh, I've got ADHD, so I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't read this." You know, who's telling you that, right? It may be the case that someone without ADHD on a particular day might be tired and couldn't read it, or maybe they're just not into reading, you know. Um, and also when we look at other people, you know, for some situations, it's actually useful to have an ADHD diagnosis, especially if you're dealing with um, a confusing system and it's flinging applications forms at you and you're struggling to do it. You know, it can be quite useful to say, actually, you know, I've got ADHD, and then you're kind of people suddenly immediately treat you like you're uh, um, fragile or something, and in a sense you are, you know. Like I really do struggle with forms in a way. You know, I used to feel nauseous when I had to do forms. They used to make me panic and feel nauseous. I'm not quite so serious now, but when I get a tidal wave of admin to do, it can really knock me sideways. It's deeply unpleasant. At the moment I run a charity. Well, it's not a charity, I run a reforestation organization, and the process of founding the Brazilian side of that has meant dealing with a load of forms and stuff, and it's just embarrassing every time I have to deal with a Brazilian, because like it's actually really easy for most people to manage those things, but it's not easy for me at all. It's genuinely difficult, you know. So you know, my team knows that I've got certain qualities and I've also got certain weaknesses, you know. And what you were talking about there about that what you were kind of getting at is the fact that you see the detail, but you also see the distant thing. I've noticed, you know, when we were hanging out the other day, um, you were kind of bouncing around some really crazy uh, relations between ideas, which is a wonderful kind of neurodiverse trait. You know, it's like I don't know if you've read the Glass Bead game, but Herman Hesse's book about finding a kind of something in a historical moment, something in a musical piece, something in a piece of furniture, and seeing these kind of signatures across the world like that. Um, that's that's a real quality. Like I can't remember, for example, when my sister's birthdays are. I really can't. I'm rubbish at kind of point information, but I'm very good at comparative history, and I've written kind of articles on it, right? I have that particular relational skill of relating distantly connected things, and it comes at price. Like sequences are very difficult for me. So, you know, I've struggled. I can't, you know, I've been an English teacher, but I can't spell. I'm dyslexic as well. I've managed to teach myself, but, you know, putting certain things in an order is easy for some people, and it's not. Like I see, if you say to me, if I say, "Where's the library?" and you say it's down there, turn right, take the second left, cross the bridge, I'm lost already, you know. Um, I don't have that kind of sequential way of thinking, right? So what just getting back to where would I like to go forward, just to I think it's important for us to appreciate that diversity in any system is healthy, whether that's an ecosystem, whether then that's a meal, whether that's a party, you know. Imagine just talking to yourself the whole time. It'd be boring, you know. So I think it's kind of important for us to appreciate diversity. And I think that's quite difficult when we're chucking around words like ADHD.
Mm. Thank you for sharing. That's been awesome to hear all of that. And yeah, it's the aim is to keep these things short and sweet so everyone can not get, you know, sucked in and or not wanting to get sucked in and then skipping it or not watching it at all. So yeah, it's been fantastic chatting with you, and we can do another one again at some point if there's something you want to bring up and we can have real specific topic about. I'll put the article that you've written about ADHD and the science and the unscience and all, and the confusions around Ritalin and all of that stuff too in the
Okay.
comments. And is there anything else you want to share before we go?
Yeah, I want to say that that article, it's called "Is ADHD a Superpower and is Ritalin Kryptonite?" It's on Graham Hancock's website. It's also got some neurodiverse artists have submitted some pieces there as well. So go and have a look at that. Do I have anything else to share? I mean, I've got loads to share. I wrote this book, for example, that's called Science Revealed. And I wrote this book as well. It's called Neuroapocalypse. This is the one that goes into all kinds of different stuff that goes on in our brains, including neurodiversity, but also language and psychedelics and meditation and what those do to our perception and the superpowers that all of those different brain conditions give us. Yeah, and I will say one more thing actually. It's been a real pleasure to hang out with you, and I would love to come back.
Yeah, nice one, Danny, and Mr. Nemu. And oh yeah, that's one fascinating thing you mentioned about Nemu that you found out about recently. Do you want to just share that? The name, about the name.
Yeah, I mean, I took the name Reverend Nemu because I was living in Japan. I was actually, I needed to get ordained because I was marrying people in Las Vegas style weddings. So I got the Reverend actually online for $15. It's probably more now. Maybe it's 25. But when I was writing my first two books, and I wrote that as it was a real compulsive thing. That's another beautiful thing about NeuroWonkies is they can get quite compelled to do stuff. So I would, I've been insomniac most of my life, and suddenly my insomnia changed, and I got driven to write furiously and manically at night, and it would always come at night. And I was living with a Japanese woman at the time, and she had a teddy bear. It was actually an elephant teddy bear called Nemu Nemu. Nemu means sleepy in Japanese, or asleep. So I took the name Reverend Nemu as my pen name because I was teaching English. I was writing about ayahuasca and anarchy and stuff like that. I didn't want my English students to be Googling me, basically. So I needed a pen name anyway. So I took the name Nemu. Then many years later, I found out that nemophilia is the love of woodlands. And I have always, and I grew up near a woodland, and my day job is I run a reforestation organization, so getting trees in the ground in Brazil. That is a neurodiverse, friendly organization. It's called RAIN, and the website is rainreforest.org. So yeah, go and check out that and be nemophiliac.
Brilliant. I Nemu feel that.
That's what I mean.
Nice one. Well, let's catch up again soon, and I'll tag you in this so that you can find this recording, and I'll send you the recording we recorded. So nice one, Danny, and it's always a pleasure. Catch up next week for another brain boosting insight session, and yeah, reach out if you do want to reach out to Danny about any questions. I'm sure he'll love to answer them, and I am happy to talk about any kind of scatter confusion that's going on with your creative projects that you want to put into play, and any productivity routines that you want to get into. Then please reach out, because that's what I'm here for. And let's keep this conversation going about, I call it functional neurodiversity, because it gets to be functional as well, and not all about these negative traits. So much love, all the best.
Great.
One
Should I
sec.
give a shout out to the people online?
Shout outs.
Shout out to Celastrus paniculatus, which is the medication, the medicine I take. It's a seed. It looks like this. It comes from the intellect tree. So if any of you are interested in a kind of herbal, dopamine boosting, focusing medicine, then check out the Intellect Tree, even if you haven't got time to read my article.
Brilliant. If anyone wants to know more about that, then put that in the comments too, and Danny will get back to you about that too. Nice. All right. I'm trying to work out how to actually, because it's streaming from and recording in two places. It doesn't have the
Are we
stop
trapped here
button. Oh yeah,
forever?
there we go. Stop.